Welcome to the Principal Series on Ethics. Bienvenue. Mon nom est Nathalie Desrosiers, and I am the principal of Massey College. Massey College is built on Indigenous land, the land of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. We are grateful for the stewardship of the land and for the ability that we have to meet here, even virtually. This series is dear to my heart. It stems from the recognition that the privilege of education brings about responsibilities. And Massey College is rich in intellectual endeavors. Our junior fellows are engaged in serious academic work, both at the graduate level or in professional schools. Our senior fellowship and our members of the Quadrangle Society are here because they want to engage in discussions about current events, about books, about current research discoveries. So this series is about the power that comes from accessing all these great endeavors. The power that comes from exercising privilege needs to be accompanied by ethical responsibilities. So we want to equip our junior fellows with the skills necessary for them to be the best that they could be and serve the public good, as the mission of Massey demands. So I want to thank the funders of this series, Peter Lewis, Ian Wardell, Tim Casgrain, Renee Sorrell. We could not do it without you, so I am very grateful for your financial support. And I also want to thank Tom Axworthy, who has been organizing this 2021 series. Today is a reflection on the ethical dilemmas of the COVID pandemic. There's no shortage of issues there. Please enjoy the discussion.
Well, I want to welcome you. My name is Reverend Don Gibson, and this is the third session on ethics that Tom Axworthy and I have organized. The next one's coming up on February the 8th on the media. I want to welcome and thank our three panelists today. Each is going to bring a very unique perspective to the ethical challenges around COVID and in particular COVID recovery. They're going to speak in a few moments, but I would like to just share a little bit with you about them. Lois Wilson will be our third speaker. She's the first female moderator of the United Church of Canada. She was president of the Canadian Council of Churches and the World Council of Churches, a longtime Canadian senator, an author of numerous books. But I believe the most important thing that I could say about Lois is that she's been a lifelong champion for justice. And I think we're going to hear some of that today. Kerry Bowman is a bioethicist and conservationist, part of the University of Toronto's Family and Community Medicine, the Joint Centre for Bioethics, and Centre for the Environment. Kerry specializes in end-of-life decision-making, cross-cultural healthcare, as well as genetics and ethical questions regarding emerging medical technology. Kerry speaks and consults around the world. In fact, over the last months, you perhaps have heard him on a number of occasions doing interviews on various media platforms. Stewart Mcdonald is a principal of a Toronto-based consulting firm specializing in executive management. He worked with startups and large corporations on issues of change and innovation. He's an expert in using technology for business transformation. Stewart has extensive entrepreneurial and corporate experience. He was the founder of Expedia Canada, was the global CEO of Expedia.com, and was a senior executive with FreshBooks. We find ourselves in the midst of this pandemic. For me, perhaps the symbol of this pandemic is captured in the last two Christmas Eves that I celebrated as a minister. At the end of services in 2019, I stood at my church door after each service and I shook hands. And over the course of the evening, I shook hands and hugged somewhere over 1,000 people. This year, 2020, I was hunkered down here in my office in our building doing a Zoom service. Our lives and world have changed. We're in the second wave and it's unnerving. Vaccines are slowly rolling out, but we know it's going to take a long time. I want to just, as we begin, just offer a few glimpses of some of the challenges and issues that are there. Obviously, the question of seniors and workers in long-term care facilities and their families, just an incredibly devastating story. A part of my job over the years has been visiting seniors in residences. When the lockdown came, I had to resort to using telephone to contact and reach those who could be reached that way. In one call with a senior I know well, she said to me, "You know, Reverend Don, we're just sitting here waiting, wondering if we're going to be next." We look at our ICU units filling up, maxing out. The health and service providers, month after month, providing care. There was a telling interview recently of a nurse, and she was asked, "What's the difference for you between the first and the second wave?" And she replied that before the second wave even started, we were already worn out. I've stood at gravesides during COVID with grieving families and heard their stories of not being able to be with their loved ones as they were dying or to say goodbye. I look around my neighborhood at the numerous small businesses and I wonder how they're going to survive. That's a huge economic impact, but also that impact on those lives, those lost hopes and dreams. Families separated, families struggling to balance work and children and learning from home. We look at the issue of vaccine distribution. I don't know if you saw recently or even perhaps gave it a try. There's on the internet a calculator that can tell you, if you put your age in, when you just might get this vaccine. Me, July to September, I was a little disappointed. I'd hoped I'd have it by the spring. I want to get on like all of us with my life. The vaccine rollout, the federal and provincial governments kind of nipping at each other's heels over this whole thing. My wife and I are involved in an AIDS orphans project in Kibera, the slums of Nairobi in Kenya, where we are trying to help women, mothers and grandmothers who have taken in AIDS orphans, helping them with their small businesses, with school fees and other things. And I wonder, there's probably not really a calculation tool, a measurement to even begin to imagine when our friends there might possibly think about receiving a vaccine. I was deeply saddened and angered by the opinion poll recently, suggesting that against all advice, nearly half of Canadians chose over the holidays to gather with people outside their household. Quebec, in part, is responding to this by issuing a curfew. I grew up in Montreal. I was a teenager during the War Measures Act, and I remember the sight of soldiers patrolling our streets in the evening. On New Year's Eve, many people gathered in Nathan Phillips Square against all advice. A journalist the next day asked our mayor, John Tory, why officials didn't break up the crowd or didn't close streets so people couldn't gather. He spoke about the difficulty of blocking perhaps over 200 or more streets and security concerns about moving into a larger crowd. But then he paused, and I'm not quoting him directly, but I think I'm quoting his sentiment. He said, in the end, it's really about the choices we make. And I think that's the truth of it. Beating this pandemic, emerging from this pandemic, is about the choices that we can make collectively and individually. I look forward to our panelists addressing that question. And as they are, feel free to take advantage of sending us in your questions for the panel so that we might use those a little later in this time together. The question then is, what ethical choices do we need to make collectively and individually to emerge from this COVID pandemic? We're going to begin with Terry. Thank you.
All right. I assume everyone can hear me. Hello to all. And, as a clinical bioethicist practicing and teaching bioethics, I hardly know where to begin when it comes to this question of pandemic ethics right now. But I know where I'm going to focus on. And, let's be very clear, guys. We are in an acute period of this. Not only are we in a global pandemic, but these weeks and months of early 2021 that we're in right now represent one of the greatest challenges this country has seen since World War II. Now, a lot of people would say, yeah, but that's a bit strong. That might be hyperbole. It's hard to feel such a challenge when we're tucked away in our whatever we are, basements or dining rooms or whatever we're doing. Remember, not everyone is tucked away so nicely as some of us might be. But we are clearly facing a great challenge. Later in 2021, all indications are things will get better. But when we look to recovery, and we're not there yet, we're far from it actually, but I'm an ethicist, so let me talk about ethics. A lot of people have said, and you don't need me to remind you, that what this pandemic has taught us is we have tremendous inequality within our society, and the virus has really moved into those niches very quickly. I can't talk about all of them in the time that I have, but I'd like to focus on the situation with senior citizens within Canada and long-term care. And I would say, if we are who we say we are as Canadians, this is a challenge post-pandemic where we have to change things. We have not done well on this front at all. Thousands of people are dead. And, fortunately, we have some fairly broad consensus with vaccine rollout in the last few weeks that we are, in fact, going to protect our most vulnerable within society, people living within long-term care, and people that work with that. Even within that, we're having trouble. We're finding out that some of the hospitals have decided to give the vaccine to all kinds of staff, including administrative staff that don't see patients, people working from home. So we're really struggling even to close the gap on what we consider as the most important element. But I would say, one thing I'd love to see us take away from this pandemic is how deeply ingrained our prejudice is towards ageism. We live in a society, and I feel proud of this, with an expanding moral circle. We are rethinking everything from gender to race to disability. All of this is very, very positive. If there's one element that has not been well incorporated into that, it's age. If the long-term care facilities were children's facilities or even facilities for younger people, I really doubt we would be so slow to react to this. This is one of our greatest challenges. And post-pandemic, not even before post-pandemic, even now, but as we think about ways to rebuild our society, we have got to rethink not just long-term care, but our entire reactions to older people. What we tended to do in the first wave was focus a great deal on our hospitals. And I get that. I work in hospitals. I understand all of that. But we really did that at the detriment of the long-term care facilities. And even with the months, the summer lull when cases went way down and some of us actually went out for lunch outdoors, remember that? Even within that period, we did not do well at building infrastructure to protect for a potential second wave. And the second wave is here, and it's very, very serious. What I do take to be a little more positive, and the endless Canadian comparison is to the Americans. And look, I don't want to put the Americans down. They've been through a lot with their government and with the pandemic struggle. So we are fortunate that we did not divide ideologically as a country and battle out as many types of things as many of the American states did. But our real trouble has been in a fractured healthcare system, and this innate, just below the conscious mind prejudice, I would argue, towards older people within Canadian society that has driven so much of these losses. And it's not just older people. We've seen that vulnerability in general, homelessness within Canadian societies, racialized groups. I would say as an ethicist, I can hardly believe how much we've learned in such a short time. But as we look to recovery, again, we're not there yet. It is so critical that we find a way to integrate this moral learning that has occurred over these 10 months. And 10 months is not the end point. I don't know what the end point is, but that we integrate these moral lessons that have emerged left, right, and center to build a better society, because I absolutely think that we can. There's no question about that. How am I for time, everybody? I'm just conscious of my own time. Am I good?
Do you want to sum up for us?
Yeah. I mean, knowing there's other speakers and knowing we have a question and answer period, I think I'm going to leave it at that, because that's the main point I wanted to make for now. And let's leave it there. And I'm wide open to questions when we get there.
Okay. Thank you. Then we'll turn to Stuart.
Thanks, Don. And it's great to be here with everybody today. For sure, COVID-19 has just kind of ripped things apart when it comes to exposing these sorts of fault lines in society, without a doubt. And as kind of the business guy here on the panel, I guess the thing that sort of struck me more than anything as relates to that side is the emergence of this kind of false equivalency and sort of artificial setup of either you are open and functioning or you're closed and you're not. So I think that a lot of where we have ended up has been as a result of trying to find a false middle ground between allowing business and commercial activity to continue in support of the economy. But remember, it's not just about the economy. A lot of people think about this as like, oh, you know, it's just about making money. No, it's people's livelihoods and lifestyles and things that are really important. Businesses they've built, small and mid-sized businesses, service businesses, are the backbone of the Canadian economy. I have deep experience working with businesses in travel, transportation, hospitality all around the world. So, I mean, I have seen tens, hundreds of thousands of people simply, you know, unemployed because of the virtual shutdown of many of these categories. But I think that a lot of the battle from an ethics perspective as relates to this has been completely misplaced. This idea that you either shut everything down or you allow things to be open, and if you allow things to be open, then the economy will just continue as it was, and you know, and people's livelihoods and jobs and the economy would be protected. I don't think that there's anything that could be further from the truth. I'm not downplaying the question of sort of the disparity schism that's been just like blatant. But if you look at places, for instance, China, that I've done a lot of work in Asia Pacific over the past couple of years, and so I've been tracking everything that's been happening in that region. If you look at what happened in China, this was the source of the pandemic, but they came in hard, they shut everything down, and now essentially it's a domestic-based economy. There's no international travel happening, although there's a ton of international trade happening. Their economy is essentially back to normal. They didn't try to do any sort of, we're going to do a little bit of this, we're going to do a little bit of that, we're going to have a light lockdown, but we're going to leave a lot of things open. We're kind of directly or indirectly going to be choosing winners and losers in the economy against this sort of backdrop of trying to create an economic future or an economic present that is that somehow finds this middle ground. The reality is, if you opened everything up and said, okay, go for it, the economy is the most important thing, clearly it's not. But if you were to say that, there are still enough people that of their own volition are going to stay home and not participate in the economy, that the economy would not be coming back in some kind of a boom state regardless. So the thing that I've found kind of most shocking here is this false equivalency and this sense of not actually coming in and addressing the cold facts, which are not just do we need to control the virus to do job one, which is to ensure that more people don't get sick, and and the hospitals and long-term care and people don't die. I mean, that is clearly the primary objective. But until you can eliminate that fear from people and from enough people that they're comfortable to re-engage in the society and they're comfortable to go out of their homes if they're fortunate enough to be able to stay in their homes, and again, that's that schism we're talking about, then if you're not comfortable, if people aren't comfortable doing that, then you don't have enough demand anyway to be able to have a robust economy. So, if you look at China, and specifically with sort of an economic hat, they tackled the virus, they came down hard, and then they have been tracking and tracing, and the economy is essentially back to where it was. Looking at it with a travel and hospitality lens that I'm very familiar with, they're having conventions with hundreds of thousands of people. The hotels are full again. The domestic flights are operating as they were before. Their economy essentially had a hard stop, and now is back with the absence of international travel, inbound and outbound. Other than that, it's essentially back to normal. So when I look at the recovery, I think that we somehow have to find a way to say that there really isn't a workable middle path. There isn't something that we're going to be able to cobble together, because there are still enough people who, of their own volition, are going to remain removed from the economy and actually not outspending money and driving demand. And absent that demand, you're still going to have businesses that will fail, and you're still going to have things that are completely disrupted and negatively impacted. So job one has to be to control the virus in order to create an environment and a situation whereby any sort of economic growth and recovery and normalcy is going to return. And that is, of course, putting aside the fundamental fact that is protecting people's lives is the most important thing. But trying to find a middle ground between lives and economy is a fool's errand, because there's a false equivalency between being open and being closed as somehow being good and being bad. You need to create a world whereby people feel safe enough that they are willing to re-engage in the economy in big enough numbers to be able to have a functioning economy, regardless of whether or not some decision is being made that things should be open.
Great, thank you. And now, Lois, we'll turn to you, please.
Thank you. Anytime I hear the phrase, let's get back to normal, I cringe. I don't want to get back to normal. I want to go beyond normalcy. I mean, there's some things we have to do normally, but we're in a crisis, and crisis always means an opportunity. And historically, crises have always meant new things in our society, new ways of being together. So after World War I, women got the vote in Canada. After World War II, we had the creation of the United Nations. So I look not back to normal, but what we create that is going to be new. And I'm talking about systemic social change, systemic ethical change, not just personal. What have we learned? Well, some of us have learned that we are independent and we're vulnerable, both locally and globally. Some of us have not learned that virus knows no boundaries. So politicians continue to travel and snowbirds go off and so on and so forth. And so we're all in this together becomes, yeah, but me first. That's an ethical issue. What we've learned is also that in Canada, we warehouse people. The previous two speakers have talked about long-term care homes, and that's important, but there's also, we warehouse people in prisons. We warehouse them as migrant workers in refugee centers, Indigenous people, places where people are put together, so they have to live closely together. There's no hope of social distancing. In some places, there's no water to wash your hands, so there's no hope of containing the virus under those conditions. And what that says to me is that needs systemic change in the way we do things, in the way we set up institutions for people who are in some peril here. And the ethical question for Canadians is, will some of us who are not in that situation be prepared to pay the cost of that? Because it'll be costly. But we need to really rethink the way all those people in those institutions I've mentioned are living. In some long-term retirement homes, which incidentally are run for profit, they're not non-profit, 4 or 5 in a bedroom. There's no hope of social distancing. So this says to me, systemic change is needed, not just personal change. Second thing I'd like to mention is that we've learned also that there's a huge economic divide, has been mentioned by the others, but it's on both sides. So both food banks and billionaires explode during the pandemic. And the crack in our culture and in our society has become more evident because of the pandemic. What's our ethical response to that? I mean, the question is, will people have a living wage to survive? And I would make a modest suggestion here. It's not a silver bullet, but it would help greatly. And there's growing support for it across the country. And that is the guaranteed livable income, which is based on how much people earn. It's really a negative income tax, so that for people earning less than $2,000 a month, they would get a check in automatically every month to sustain them so they can buy food and pay the rent. I mean, I don't have to keep proving that I'm over 65, that I am a senior and I therefore deserve a check from the government every month. And it seems to me that people earning less than $2,000 a month, we should look at that very seriously. As I say, it's not the whole thing, but it would help a great deal. A third thing I want to mention is that we're on the cusp of another crisis, which is even greater than the virus, and that's going to be climate change. And we're into it now, and I hope that we don't forget about that one, because that's going to be the test of whether we're looking at new ways to live together on the planet or whether we're just going to return to normal. And finally, what is the political will in all this? Is there any political will to look at alternatives to the warehousing of people, which will cost more? Is there any political will to look at climate change seriously? Is there any political will for the parties to work together on some things instead of adversarially? And that's hard because the model is adversarial, and it's all we've known, and the political posturing. They've tried to work together on the COVID and with limited success. But I think those are some of the ethical issues. Crisis is opportunity, and we've been given this opportunity perhaps once in our lifetime. We may get it again, we will get it again with climate change. So how can we move beyond the normal, beyond what used to be, into something new, which will be just for people and create a better way to live together? Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much, Lois. Matt, do we have any questions that have come forward? Okay. Sorry, okay. Well, as we're looking to do that, let me maybe ask a question. Stuart talked about the need to immediately address the virus and the healthcare issue. And so I'm going to ask each of you just really quickly, just under 1 minute, one thing that we need to do most immediately to address the health concern. And we'll begin same order. So we'll go back to Terry if we could. Kerry's been muted. We're not hearing Kerry. There we are.
Okay,
great.
Now you're hearing me. Yeah. You know, I think the thing, looking at this timeline that we're in right now, is we need vaccine supply. You know, I'm looking at a tech solution to a complex social and medical problem, but I think the only way out of this is vaccine supply. And we need an equitable system, and we need people to adhere to that system, and we need to move heaven and earth to make sure that vaccines can be rolled out. But look, this is only acute. I agree with everything Lois said in relation to the broad, complex structural elements, and I'm hoping we can circle back to that. And Stuart, I mean, you know, early in the pandemic, people were saying, you know, are you nuts? We can't talk about economics at a time like this. Well, look how many people's lives have been ruined because of the economic fallout from this. Economics is integrated with all of our lives. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
Okay. Stuart.
I think that Kerry sort of hit the nail on the head in terms of we don't get past this and be able to deal with anything else until we're in a situation where people feel confident again, and they're not going to feel confident again until the vaccines have been distributed. And getting that done quickly and efficiently and with fairness is crucial. I would say that we're going to continue probably until for maybe the next 6-7 months anyway, of having this push and pull between health and economic activity and health and economic activity. And I wish that we could just avoid that and just focus on getting the thing under control, such that some degree of economic activity could return. I think that that finding some kind of middle ground, we've just seen that it doesn't matter. And also from a policy perspective, the degree of mixed messages that's out there saying it's a lockdown, but then basically everything's still open, and most people are just choosing to ignore it. You know, I don't know that the finger wagging is helpful. You know, I've certainly been close to it with the air travel thing, where people have been justifiably extremely frustrated with people traveling when the government has a ban on anything but essential travel, and that's true. The interesting thing there that a lot of people don't realize is that the federal government's policy that's in place right now is what's called a level 3 advisory. That means that they are recommending against international travel. They could put a level 4 advisory, which is banning international travel. They could do that. That's within their power, but they haven't done it. And so with the level 3 advisory, it's essentially up to the individual. It is up to the individual, if you read the rules, to decide what's essential or not. So you know, I'm using that as an example to say that we can be hopeful that individuals will act responsibly. And without a doubt, I would say the vast majority of people are acting responsibly. There are some people for whom acting responsibly is extraordinarily difficult because of where they fall in terms of the economic scale, and the roles that they play, and how they either live or are forced to live. But sort of saying this is about if only people would be more responsible, that also doesn't make sense, because we know that people aren't always responsible. If everybody was responsible, we wouldn't need laws anyway. So I think that in the immediate term, as counterintuitive it is from an economic perspective, I think we need clearer direction and like really forceful direction around what needs to happen to ensure things are better now, so that there's some near-term possibility of returning to something approximating normalcy. And I really do agree with what Lois is saying, is that I'd love for whatever normal looks like in the future to look different than it has, and we should look for those opportunities.
Okay, thank you, Lois. One thought about the whole recovery. What would make it?
That we'll understand how the issues are so interconnected. I mean, you know, you think about senior women in the retirement homes, 5 or 6 to a room. The reason they're there is this: historically, women did not work in Canada. Women over 90, for example, in their youth did not work. They were supposed to stay home, and the husband was so that they had no money. They had therefore no pension. Therefore, they have no money now, and that's why they're in this situation. So that is a systemic thing. That is a cultural and social issue. That's been women's historic role. And I think we need to look at that. It's not just a simple matter of fixing things up. The other thing is vaccines are excellent, and I'm so happy that we're starting on that, but we need to combine that with hopefully looking after the public health suggestions for how we relate to each other. I mean, the washing and the social distancing and so on. And bearing in mind that the groups I've talked about that are warehoused have no hope of doing that because systemically they're caught in this system and they can't get out of it.
Okay, thank you. Here's a question. In my perspective, much of the messaging from government has emphasized personal responsibility in staying safe. How can we shift things to be more about system change in safety and resilience? Lois, thank you for that question. I was pondering how to ask something like that, and you did it wonderfully. Terry, would you like to take a run at that initially?
Yeah, sure. So a lot of it is about personal responsibility, and you know, it is the most important message, and I get that. I would also say, though, that you know, a lot of the bigger changes will come after the pandemic. But one of the things I find frustrating, you know, and is one of the reasons the situation is as bad as it is in Canada is our leaders have made some bad decisions, and you know, this endless finger wagging of personal responsibility. We get it. All the things about Christmas are true, etc., etc. But I find it goes a bit too far, in which it's your fault and it's my fault that this has happened, as opposed to this is a combination of the behavior of the public, but it's also our leadership has made some very, very poor decisions. And, you know, systemically, it's extremely complex. You know, you're hearing from Stewart some very interesting points related to economics, that it's not some simple black or white situation. And you know, right now, all we can really do is isolate ourselves as much as we can. You look at something like, you know, we're about to probably be hit with a curfew. What's the evidence for that? It's an open question. We don't really know. But you know, to look at larger, healthier ways of doing this, I mean, I'm not trying to dodge it, but I really think this comes after the pandemic. The other thing, and I don't mean to digress, and I'm building a little bit on what Lois said, because you know, the other side of my career is environmental work. The cause of this pandemic was environmental. It's the commodification of wildlife, the destruction, the loss of biodiversity. I know that's a whole separate seminar. I appreciate that. But you know, that's getting lost in the message as well, because this may not be the last pandemic. Talk to anyone that knows about emerging viruses. The situation's looking really bad, actually. So we do need some massive structural changes, but they're also sort of social, structural, and systemic changes, the way Lois has spoken of.
Okay, thank you. Stuart, a comment or two on that question.
Yeah, I'm going to take it in a little bit of a different direction. And when we talk about system, I agree with the concerns that Lois has raised, and I certainly agree with the question around climate change and the bigger issues facing us down the road. I'm going to talk about systems in a different way. Imagine if this had happened 20 years ago. And imagine if all the things that we're just taking for granted. Now, I shouldn't say all of us, okay? This has further illustrated this massive gap that we have. But the reality for in Canada, many tens of millions of people, has been that their lives have been able to continue, albeit somewhat restricted, through the use of technology, through the distribution of knowledge via technical means, by relatively affordable infrastructure that has made all of this stuff possible. So when I think about systems, I also think that there's some things that are going to fundamentally change when we look at recovery. I think one of the things that's going to fundamentally change when we look at recovery is going to be the nature of work, because the reality is that now for tens of millions of people, place is no longer an issue, and that their lives and their work, be it government, academic, business, whatever, anything that is sort of knowledge-based, has essentially been able to just move in one fell swoop into wherever the heck they happen to be. I think that this underscores that we need to be thinking more about safety and equity in manufacturing, agriculture, fishery, and the topics that Lois was putting in place, where the requirement for physical distancing is frankly not possible because of the way things have been set up. But from a systems perspective, let's also not lose sight of the fact that we have actually learned that Canada, primarily a services economy, has been able to continue almost in many ways, almost without missing a beat. That's not to say that there aren't millions of people who have been negatively impacted by it, who are forced into working situations that are unjust, and that safety needs to be reconsidered. But if you think about this other thing that we've learned, that is that this knowledge economy that we have, which employs many and creates so much value, and actually enables government, a lot of academia to have been able to essentially continue unabated. The fact that we've been able to make that happen in the space of it wasn't a question of even a couple of months. I mean, that almost happened overnight. That is quite remarkable. And so what does that mean in terms of how we might sort of look at things differently in the future?
Thank you. Lois, a quick comment. Actually, I'm going to ask you this question because it comes from somebody you know well. It comes from Tom Axworthy. Tom writes, system change crucial, but in an immediate crisis, thousands a day infected. What about personal responsibility? What must each of us do? Why have we not been doing it? Lois, do you want to take a run at that for us?
Yep. Can I say something about the previous question first?
Sure. Oh yeah.
Because I agree that the nature of work is about to change, and that's very interesting. But I'm more concerned about the people who don't work, who have not been allowed to work, the ones who fall between the cracks. And that's why I mentioned the guaranteed livable income as systemic change, which would be permanent. It would be a sea change in Canada as big as Medicare if it happened. All the pilots are positive about it. And I think that the only way to move from questions of personal responsibility to systemic change is to create the systemic change and then point to it, because people learn by models. They don't learn other ways. And so that's my comment on that. Now, right. Tom wants to know about personal responsibility. Well, it depends who you are, what your personal responsibility is going to be. We've talked about the need for obeying, looking after the public health guidelines, which people think that they're immune. I mean, it applies to everybody except them. I am one of those. And so we tend to skirt around if we can. But I think personal responsibility, we should each be acting in our own sphere of influence, whatever that may be. So it's very difficult to say exactly what people should be doing. I don't want to, say what other people should be doing. I know what I need to do, but that's all I need to say.
Okay. Here's another question. Chinese journalists were recently arrested for coverage of Wuhan. How can we have the effectiveness of controlling COVID without the sort of social control that we don't want? Kerry, do you want to begin that?
Mm-hmm. I'm just trying to make sure I grasp the question. So, China, can you flip it one more time? I did read it, but it seemed to have two parts to it. Yeah. Chinese journalists were recently arrested for coverage of Wuhan. Yes, that's exactly right. And how can we have the effectiveness of controlling COVID without the sort of social control that we don't want? Is this an addendum to the question? No. Okay. Yeah. We've lost a lot of civil liberties. There's no question within this. What's going on in China and what's going on here, there's some comparison, there's some commonalities, and there's some differences. China right now is going through a phase where the WHO enters China today. They've been put off for weeks and months to look for the essential cause of COVID-19. And so China is extremely concerned about what that will be seen to be, and China does not want to be blamed for this. So it's an extremely tricky political situation. But, you know, looking at Canada, you know, the outbreak certainly didn't happen here, but we live in a global world. But we too, very different, you know, we're a mature democratic society, but we too have lost a lot of civil liberties since the outbreak has begun. And when this ends, will we get them back? You know, we're talking about curfews within days. You know, when, I don't know. When has Toronto ever had a curfew? I don't know if it's ever happened before. But imagine, you know, and I'm not even saying you know, this is fundamentally immoral or anything, but, you know, if you're walking at 8:15 at night, you could be charged with something. I mean, that's coming almost imminent. And, you know, we've really lost a lot of control in terms of surveillance and our phones and those types of things. Data sharing is rampant left, right, and center. And, you know, the pandemic has been the reason for this, but I really, really wonder whether we'll be able to retrieve some of these losses when the pandemic winds down, and if the state has not gone too far in this. So again, it's happening in China, but we've got our own problems as to what is happening here. Vaccination passports, immunity passports, you know, this is coming very, very quickly as well. And civil liberties is a big question.
Okay, thank you.
Can I comment on that?
By all means.
In terms of, it ties in with Tom's previous question, because what you can do is track the personal responsibility around civil liberties by bringing up the website of the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, because their staff is well on to the loss of civil liberties and they need support. So one personal responsibility you could do is bring up the website of the Canadian Civil Liberties Association, support them, get your information there, and keep up to date with what's happening to the loss of some civil liberties in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Don, I'm going to jump in on the question that Tom Axworthy had asked before the last one, that I think we kind of skimmed past, the question of personal responsibility, and I don't want to say that. I don't want to come off sounding like I don't think that there are personal responsibilities. I believe that there absolutely that is critical, that people need to be taking responsibility where in every situation that they can to follow the practices that are being called for. And I think that the challenge is that everybody's sense of what's appropriate sort of falls on a curve. There isn't a single viewpoint that says this is exactly what my responsibilities should be. And so that's why I think that there has been I feel like we were sort of going down a pretty good path, maybe back in on the run up to the summer, where things felt like they were being science-led and being kind of thoughtful and people were on board. But now it feels very much more that it's kind of that the policy directives are less clear, and the sense of people taking personal responsibility. You know, there are some that still do. In fact, most do, but they're doing it in the way that feels right to them, and absent clearer calls or clearer indications of what they should or shouldn't be doing, or frankly, you know, perhaps having their toys taken away from them because they're demonstrating that they can't bring that personal responsibility to bear, or not enough of them do to be able to impact the spread of the virus. That, you know, this is where we find ourselves. So it's I'm sure that many of us in our own kind of social circles are aware of some people who are very fearful and are acting that way, and other people who are less so and are acting differently. So just wagging fingers and saying be responsible, you're still going to get varying outcomes, because what responsible is feels very different for different people.
Thank you. I'm going to shift us a little bit, and we've been focusing, a lot on our own challenges. And for each of you, just to share quickly, what might you consider to be some of our global responsibilities as a country? As a democratic Western country, what responsibilities do we have in the wider world as we look to COVID recovery? So, Kerry, I'll begin with you if you wouldn't mind.
Mm-hmm. I think they're huge. I work with some people in the Faculty of Medicine that are saying repeatedly, we cannot be thinking about the outside world at a time like this. We have to take care of our own country. There's two problems with that. There's an ethical problem and there's an epidemiological problem. The ethical problem is it is just plain wrong to not be reaching out and helping, what many would call the global south, which we've really not even begun in terms of pandemic recovery. Absolutely, we need to be doing that. Secondly, this pandemic will not end if we take a nationalist view, as long as the virus is out there, and it will come back at us. And third, I said two, but I'm sneaking in a third. Third, the causes of this pandemic were related to global drivers of environmental change. That tends to get lost. And that is why it is critical that we take a global view with this. And I think we can do it. It's 2021. Things have changed very quickly, as Stuart said. It's true. Stuart, I was around for SARS. When you said if this happened 20 years ago, it kind of did. I was around for the first SARS, and we were very limited. I was quarantined. I couldn't do anything. A few phone calls, but I couldn't function as a hospital employee. Anyway, so I agree with that point very much. But I cannot think of anything more important than not taking a global perspective here. We have to.
Okay, Stuart.
Yeah, I think, and I agree fully with what Kerry said, but I would also say, kind of pulling on my sort of personal or kind of business-facing hat, I do work with organizations literally around the world, and you cannot isolate. You just cannot. There's no sort of barrier to this stuff, and we are as awful as it's been, and as many hopefully fixable chasms that this has exposed in terms of how we operate as a society. We still, as a wealthy, mid-power, tolerant, in many ways extraordinarily successful country, have to be able to step up and help those for whom that is it will be of use. And I think that one of the first things that we'll see in terms of, well, I don't know, not the first things, because I'm not in the midst of this in terms of dealing with the here and now from data sharing and vaccine distribution and all that sort of stuff. But I have to believe that as the country that has the most doses of the various vaccine candidates approved and otherwise on reserve for our citizens, that finding a way for that to start to be redirected to those who are further down the unfortunate pecking order has to be part of it. And again, I'm thinking about this in the very kind of immediate term, right? Like there are huge systemic issues that we need to address, but we're extremely fortunate, and so this would be the absolute wrong time to stop engaging globally.
Thank you. Lois, your comments, your thoughts.
Yes, I agree with the fact that environmental change is global. That, that crisis is on us now, just not, it's kind of put on the background because of COVID, but it's with us. And that's global. Second thing is that many citizens belong to organizations which have global contacts. I happen to be connected with the church, which has global people, and I was yesterday on the email with a friend in India asking what's going on in India. So our colleagues in other countries can be a great source of information and also resources. And there are NGOs that do that and so on, and I really applaud that. The other thing is that the Canadian government, you know, Trudeau has said Canada's back in the world, but I don't think so. The Security Council doesn't think so either. So we need to, Canadian aid to global partners is really at an abysmal level, and we need to look at that and put some heat on our politicians on that one.
Thank you. Thank you. Our time is drawing to a close, and I want to thank our three panelists. We've had a broad and interesting conversation. I mean, we could go on and on, but I want to thank each of you for giving us your time and your insight as we look at emerging from COVID. I also want to thank the people at Massey College. Alicia Ginsberg has done a lot of organizing, and Matt Glanford has been our technical wizard, and I really, really want to thank him. And I believe you have some slides advertising what's going to happen in the near future.